Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are still in Tafseer, and I'd like to say one thing. When we're speaking about Tafseer, I know sometimes one might say, well, just take me to what the word is saying and don't necessarily go into all that and all those details. It's enough to just know the surface interpretation and I'll do the rest. But I'd like to say one thing. You see all those mufassirin, and we can go and all that. You know what? I can take you to some of the scholars of tafsir and their books and what they really do. They will take you into a world of, let's call it, just like you're going into an ocean. You would be going into an ocean, and then if an expert like these mufassirin right there, they would take you through these areas as experts in oceans, and they would just help you identify the different gems in there, the different things that you probably, as a nuanced, maybe swimmer, you would think of this as just a normal rock, but not know that that wasn't actually a rock, but that was probably costing you $2 million. Or this little piece that you thought was really nothing is probably something that is costing you even more than that, or it's probably $2 million, or who knows what. And that's what the mufassirin are. They're basically the trained divers that have the keys to help you identify those gems in those rich waters in the Quran. And that's what tafsir and tafsir is. You look at those tafsir, if a person were to probably take perhaps a PhD in tafsir, they might actually just go to one or two, or yeah, perhaps be specialized in more than one tafsir in one particular ayah. But you're seeing all these scholars that would spend hours and hours and days and nights just talking about the different influences in Lugha Arabiya, the different influences that they saw through the lens of hadith or through the lens from one ayah to another, and how we can see these great gems in the Quran. How do we find those gems? What is this trying to give us? What is this trying to somehow enlighten us with? And that's just to keep in mind that the Quran was a revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this revelation was in order to enlighten man, throughout time, throughout those coming days, those eras, and those situations that could be contradictory, that could be filled with so many different so many different challenges. The Quran is there was in order to bring about enlightenment. The Quran was there in order to bring about that vision to help you understand what makes justice, what makes happiness, what gets you to the purpose that preceded your existence, and so forth. So when we look at tafsir, just taking that time to look at each and every single word in tafsir, that's actually going to increase in your relationship with the Quran, and certainly increase in your vision in how you would swim and dive in deeper than just reading the surface. You want to go deep and deep and deep and see those words and how they would unfold in the richness and meanings, or even unfold in how they could have an impact in changing our life and changing our vision, expanding our knowledge, expanding the way we see the world, expanding the way we see ourselves, expanding the way we would understand the human psychology, or even the different relations that we would say in social relations. So this is extremely important, because if we don't see through the lens of Quran, we're going to find ourselves getting lost as those that had preceded us, and how they had gotten lost because they were basically just simply taking the world based on their own whims. Their own hawa had taken them elsewhere. So that's what we're going to continue today, inshallah. كانوا لا يتناهون عن منكر فعلوه لبئس ما كانوا يفعلون. That was the ayah that we left off at last time, and we said a couple things here. Here we go. This is the ayah right there. ترى كثيرا منهم يتولون الذين كفروا لبئس ما قدمت لهم أنفسهم أن سخط الله عليهم وفي العذاب هم خالدون. Let's look into that. And we said that Al-Qurtubi went in certain details. لا يتناهون, and we said يتناهون basically has two additional, let's say, pieces of conjugation within that word, and the root is nahiya. Nahiya actually means to forbid, to prevent, but yatanahun, and we said that this would have an addition right there. You've got the a right there included in the verb, and you had the ta, and you had the ya right there, and you also had the waw and the noon. This piece of it would actually refer to plural. This a right there and the ta is to basically say that this was becoming a trend, a practice that was common within the community, and they all did not forbid one another from doing what is wrong. And this yeah is in order to tell us that that was the ongoing lifestyle, the ongoing culture that everyone was practicing. It wasn't history and it stopped, but no, it continued and continued. And how did it unfold? Well, it unfolded where the Prophet ﷺ said that they would even drink and eat and sit with one another, and that became something normalized in each other's hearts, that it wasn't too bad. You were being tolerant, you were being accepting, you were being inclusive, you were being basically somewhat of accepting people's orientation, accepting people's wrong choices, but then you had to not call it for what it is because you needed to seem tolerant. And we're not here saying, hey, be intolerant to mean a dichotomy and say, well, go and act violent. And of course, in a situation where we cannot act violent, what if we were in a situation where we would act and be in a way and in a position to act violent? In Islam, the one to have the power to use violence is basically the government. So imagine if every single time you had seen somebody perhaps do the wrong thing, that left and right, people are going to claim, well, I saw that person doing the wrong thing, and therefore I'm going to act in violence because I have the justification to do so. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting you know that that type of power is exclusive to the government because it involves investigation to be done before even going that far and correcting people through violence. Well, that's the same thing when we're talking today. The government has the police officers carrying grenades, carrying guns, carrying certainly pepper spray, and the list goes on. And they're the ones that are using it for what? Well, definitely they weren't making a parade. They're using it in those extreme situations where fugitives are basically refusing to succumb to the law and protecting or even taking consideration people's rights. The police will act. The government, basically the police are acting on behalf of the government. They'll basically engage in different ways of violence in order to instill the law, to instill social order, to instill different orders to protect people's lives, to protect people's property, to protect people's rights, etc. The list goes on and on. So in that situation, this is equivalent to that. This isn't something that is different even during our times, but you would see that during our times, they would call out, quote unquote, Islam as if it is the religion of violence, simply because sometimes it will literally say that it's important to use some form of corporal punishment or some form of violence in order to prevent outlaws or to prevent harm to people's properties and so forth. So it basically is the same thing. It's just that we may differ in the momentum of of it. We may differ in when, and we may differ in how, and we may differ in what actually makes the area of sanctity. But we would agree that property is sanctuary. We would agree that people's lives are sanctuary. We would agree that people's social order and social justice is sanctuary as well. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets us know that, hey, there's certain areas that you may not recognize the momentum and the effect and the implication that they will have on the society. So the Quran and Islam were there in order to bring about that preservation for what actually makes a fair and an important place of justice, to help us maintain security, to help us maintain peace on an individual level, on a community level, and certainly on a global level as well. So that was key. لعن الذين كفروا بني إسرائيل على لسان داود وعيسى بن مريم. And we went in details and said, well, they were cursed, and what curse really means is that they were living their own selves to basically preserve themselves. In other words, they were excruciated. They were basically accepted, or well, actually, they were what is the word that I wanted to use? Exacerbated. There you go. They were exacerbated and separated from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, and that's why they would be living in such struggle. They might be in people's visions, in people's eyes, that they were successful, that they basically gotten the tools of what makes them happy, but then you would still find them complaining that they're not living happy. They're missing out on a lot of things in this life, and the list goes on and on. And many would commit suicide. Many would basically live a life that is basically explained by them, nothing but a miserable life. So what happened? Why would they live a miserable life? And on the other hand, you would see others, they don't have the means, maybe not the wealth, maybe not even the health, but they would still be explaining that they're living a life of happiness, because happiness is not necessarily gathering from the outside, it's not necessarily gathering materialistic things, but it's actually on the inside to let it grow. And certainly it's on the inside, and there's no way that a person can live in happiness if they don't have the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala overseeing their life and giving them the life that will give them happiness. There's no way that anybody can live a happy life unless it was by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how did they get that far is the question. كانوا لا يتناهون عن منكر فعلوه. It was a mutual thing that they did not forbid each other from doing the wrong thing. لبئس ما كانوا يفعلون. So لبئس ما كانوا يفعلون. Well, it wasn't necessarily just those leaders, just those scholars probably telling them that they were supposed to be stopping. And this is really equivalent to a previous ayah that we had done and spoke about. Of course, al-Rabbaniyun, al-Ahbar, basically were supposed to be doing their job and forbidding them from doing what is wrong. But it wasn't only the Ahbar, it wasn't only the rabbis, it wasn't only the priests, it wasn't only the teachers, it wasn't everyone was actually living the culture where, well, we were supposed to be tolerant, accepting, and that's the society that we're living in today, a society where it is made to seem that if you were to call the things for what they are, if you were to call the things for what they are, that was somehow being intolerant, that was somehow going to lead to violence, that was somehow not accepting others. This was somehow being judgmental. And then without us realizing, these words were really born and really coming out from the idea of new atheism that regarded that everything is relative, meaning that there is no right and wrong, everything is relative. You basically have your vision, I have my vision, therefore we should not call each other out on our mistakes, because by doing so, then what we're doing is being intolerant of one another. And of course, that became, I guess, the culture that we're living in today. It really comes from the whole idea of atheism, that there's no definition, there's no way that you can know whether something is right, or at least morally, or considering something as morally right. Therefore, you would just have to accept people in whatever they do, and you're just supposed to be accepting people's choices. And then, of course, not realizing that it becomes a culture of postmodernism, where it's all about the whole idea that was founded on that there is no truth, but one truth, that there is no truth. And therefore, instead of using a way to let you figure out whether something is right and wrong and using evidence, they'll call you out and say, well, wait a minute, on what basis and what made you say that there is any evidence? Because this whole world was created in absurdity according to the new atheist vision. Since the world is created in absurdity, then therefore you cannot consider that something is of whatsoever a resource to consider it as an evidence to prove something right or wrong. So what did they get? Well, they created another alternative. Instead of using evidence, instead of using the rationale to prove something right and wrong and rationality, we're going to be using something else. We're going to be using emotions. And that was basically the narrative. And certainly we also would come across something called the death of the author. What is that? It's basically you're going to interpret the words as you see it. And that's why you would see, for example, um, you would see, for example, um, in meetings, in staff meetings, they might have a text and say, well, what do you understand in this? How do you read this? How do you, it's basically the death of the author, even though the words themselves are speaking for themselves. But then because the whole idea is considering, well, you can read words the way that you would like. You can have your own interpretation of things. You can have your own vision of things, because there is no truth. And therefore, we shouldn't necessarily be considering that there's such a definition for male or female, or such a definition to consider something is right or wrong. There's no such definition to consider, or such a definition that we would say that we're going to turn to identify the truths of different things. And therefore you would see this would continue. ترى كثيرا منهم يتولون الذين كفروا. You would even see many of them would basically يتولون. يتولون was key to letting us understand that we're speaking about يتولون. The root is waliya, meaning, let's write that down. This is the root. Wa and lam, and this waw right there is actually munqaliba an ya. يتولون الذين كفروا, what they were doing, waliya, and what they were doing continuously. Here's the ya to indicate that it was a present. It was basically a continuous thing that was happening. And يتولون الذين كفروا, they were also right there continuing in considering those that were the disbelievers as their place of wala, their place of patriotism, their place of decision making, their place to identify the right and the wrong in the world that surrounds them, and how do we understand things. What they were adopting was really the culture from the Kafir culture. During our times, and it's really important that psychology really brought a completely unfortunately, a completely dangerous culture that was, I would say, transforming even the Western culture from, of course, being a deist culture or a culture that was having a source of Christianity, or at least a source of wahi, to a source that was coming from Eastern religions. Eastern religions are generally atheistic religions or pagan religions. Certain words like believe in yourself, positive energy, negative energy, and those different words, many would think of it as it's just a nice way of saying things, nothing but an eloquent way of describing things, without us realizing that no, the whole idea of positive energy and negative energy is considering that this world basically has its own matter, its own energy that functions, and therefore exactly with the same idea. Remember when we're talking about how when people die, they would basically, I guess, their spirit becomes something else, and basically, what do they call that?
Reincarnation.
Incarnation, exactly. And that you would basically start somehow your soul basically transforming into perhaps a plant or an animal, etc. Although that's basically the whole idea, and where the concept of positive energy and negative energy, that's the foundation, that's the aqidah of it. And what we're seeing is that a lot of Muslims, they would think of that as an eloquent way of describing things, that's basically somehow therapeutic. It's a therapeutic way to describe yourself, that you're the source of powers, you're the source of energy, you're basically the positive energy that you're spreading around people, because that later on will have the karma and so forth. And without us realizing that was introduced by different specialists in psychology and sociology, and introduced it to whether in the American culture or whether the Western culture, because it was seen as an alternative to the deist, or at least to the Christian culture. In other words, what actually had a source of wahi to later on. And yeah, definitely Christianity had a lot of mixture, and mixture of wahi and even paganism right there. But then they basically, I guess, had chosen even worse deviations, which basically was coming from Eastern religions, and in particular, shamanism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and the list goes on and on, Confucianism, etc., and then adopting that instead of taking any source of wahi or any source of religion, because they wanted to use another form, because they couldn't stay atheist, 100% atheist. They couldn't stay not believing in any power that's controlling the world. They needed to replace it. So what they did was replace it from speaking about divine power to talking about human power, to talking about matter, it itself containing all the energy, all the power to make life exist. That's what atheism is. Atheism is basically considering that the starting point of life was really was really coming from matter itself. It's matter in motion, and therefore this is the starting point. So it was basically the cell of the amoeba cell somehow going from the one cell to probably then developing and going into random evolution. And this random evolution would basically be the inside energy, the inside force that was making and finding life and pushing life to making it what it is today. And in order to live this aqidah, literally, this aqidah of evolution, this aqidah of new atheism, they needed to continue, giving meaning to people's lives, because you couldn't continue life with this kind of aqidah. You needed some sort of a spiritual interpretation to your life. So you had John Paul Sartre, who basically said, well, we can existentialism, we could basically create our own reason, our own purpose, and we could make that be. It doesn't have to be that there was a purpose that preceded the existence. We can say it's purpose that basically you make after existence. It doesn't have to be basically found, or you can be created, it can be made up. And that's what happened. That's what happened with, of course, the ideology, the implication of how it unfolded. And during our times, you would see even dua sometimes using these words, thinking of it as it's a contemporary way, it's a modern way of making the ideas close and basically, I guess, easy to and easier to somehow, I guess, understand by the younger generation and newer generation. It's just a new term, and without us realizing things like yoga and things like the energy and things like acceptance, inclusive, all those different words. Many times we don't see the etymology, or at least the idea, and what let's call it the philosophy, and what philosophy had actually, what idea basically brings that philosophy. Absolutely, the early American literature displayed these types of self-reliance, etc. too. There's no doubt that that within Christianity, I'm not saying Christianity is completely made, or at least is founded on wahi. There's absolutely no way, or else there would be no reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send the Quran. But you could see, if you're talking about the American culture, when you look at the foundation, whether we're speaking about Plymouth Rock, whether we're speaking about the Quakers, we're speaking about, of course, the Puritans, etc. They were generally religiously oriented. They were, in fact, they were also fleeing from the great from Great Britain. One main reason was also because they wanted to practice religion in a particular way, and of course landed on Plymouth Rock, and all the story about how they were trying to be Puritans, and how the evangelicals, and later of course it's seen that the Catholics were somehow coming with something that is rather nothing but a heretic, and etc., and how they outlawed, or I guess considered, and somehow considered that the Catholics were somehow coming from a different resource, etc. But the whole idea, if you look at the American culture, even from the dollar, you would see "In God We Trust." That's why when you look at a very important thing in American history, which is the day when the Supreme Court had actually voted for the LGBT, that it was constitutional. Why is that even a main thing in American history? Because that is the start of considering that it isn't God, it isn't the Bible, it isn't religion, it isn't necessarily that makes the resource, but it's basically our choices. It's our orientation, quote unquote. It's our desires that determine how we would consider and see the world through. So this is key. When you're seeing that, it's not just any matter. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called out, I guess, if you were to look throughout history, the sins that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned and called out mainly in the Quran was shirk. It was always there. But when you look at the other sins, you're talking about one, the sin that was, I guess, described in the Quran, that it was one, that it was a form of fisq, that it was something that no one had ever come with, that it was going against the laws that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had instilled in nature. And from that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically regarded that particular sin was what blinded them from relating to truth, relating to Tawheed. You would think of this Tawheed itself, or the vision gone wrong, coming to affect people's behaviors. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us that no, that particular behavior was actually changing their vision on things. That particular behavior was the center that was going to be the main obstacle from them seeing Tawheed, from them being able to even recognize the words of the prophets and the Prophet Lut, or even the revelation itself. Now, this is extremely important to keep in mind. يَتَوَلَّوْنَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. It's important to recognize that even that culture that you may be living in, it's important to undermine, it's important to scrutinize what terms are being used. Where is that term coming from? What are the thoughts? What are the philosophies that are basically surrounding and considered as the basis for that or this idea? Is it, let's call it, intrinsically foreign to Islam, or is it something that Islam is okay and basically inclusive to accepting? And this is extremely important, because if we're not scrutinizing the depth of certain words, the words and where they're coming from, the ideologies that they're basically founded on, then you're going to be just adopting left and right blindly, and not necessarily with an open mind, recognizing truth and seeing things as a Muslim. As a Muslim, what you're supposed to be doing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you that you do not just adopt things just because everyone else is doing it, just because everyone else is saying it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you that you need to scrutinize everything that surrounds you in order to be a person that is bending to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not bending to the society. Remember when we talked about المشيئة الكونية and المشيئة التشريعية? We said المشيئة الكونية is basically the laws that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put within nature. And we said المشيئة التشريعية, they're basically the laws that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically revealed in legislature. And when we said and gave an example that if you were to jump out of, for example, a 23-story building, you're not going to expect that the laws in nature are going to change and somehow stop for your sake in order for you to be protected and think, oh, we're going to stop gravity right now. And this person that jumped out of the window from a very high place, that somehow, of course, we're going to change the laws of gravity, and somehow we're going to make this person survive the momentum that they had put themselves in, or whether it's themselves or other people. At the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you that there are certain laws of nature And the laws of legislature is about bending, is about letting our obedience bend to the laws that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created within nature. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, or that's why when you're looking at Sharia is all about الشريعة مصلحة كلها. Sharia is all about really uh, giving justice and basically for the sake of humanity. It's all for the sake of humanity. It cannot be of something that is bringing harm. It's all about bringing in further an advancement to human interests, in interest even to the different things that are within nature. So whenever it basically goes to mafsada and corruption, that's when we would know that this isn't part of Sharia. In looking at that, لَبِئْسَ مَا قَدَّمَتْ لَهُمْ أَنفُسُهُمْ أَنْ سَخِطَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ. You could say that what happened, their own nafs was giving them right there this justification, this narrative that, hey, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just accept it. It's a new way. It's a modern way of doing things. It basically makes you look cool. It makes you look up to date and not traditional and certainly not backward. And therefore, you would give that narrative, a new narrative, a narrative that it's basically a new way of doing things and therefore acceptable. And let's go back to Tafsir al-Qurtubi. Ibn Atiyah, who's Ibn Atiyah? A scholar from Al-Andalus. And he said, وَالْإِجْمَاعُ مُنْعَقِدٌ عَلَى أَنَّ النَّهْيَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ فَرْضٌ. He said, and it is unanimously agreed upon between scholars that forbidding what is from what is wrong is basically obligatory to whomever has the power and has the ability to forbid what is wrong in order for what is right. What does that mean? أمن الضرر على نفسه وعلى المسلمين. They were capable of at least securing that they would not be harmed, whether that they themselves would not be harmed or even the society at large. So sometimes if you're going, and this is basically key, by the way, because people like ISIS, for example, they didn't, I guess, recognize that by somehow thinking that they're going to be applying Islam that way, or that they're going to, let's say, not consider the different contexts that they were living in, that they were here just being courageous and they're just applying things, that's basically lacking wisdom. And certainly it's not going to be strange to lack wisdom if you lacked ilm. They lacked ilm, and eventually they basically had taken the words out of their context. And you think ISIS was made by the West? No, it's not made by the West. ISIS is not made by the West. It is actually, I would say it's more of a zealot emotions that were not having ilm. Whenever you would have emotions that would not have ilm, that's going to be a natural consequence. Is it possible that the West was making use of such ideas? In other words, let's say funding them, perhaps giving them, I guess, somewhat of the space to grow. Then with that, I'll definitely agree with you. But to say that the idea itself was made by the West, no. I can see that within our community, and it's not necessarily coming from the West. If you would see within the younger generation and many, if you have perhaps love for Islam, that's not enough to basically defend Islam. If there's no ilm, there's no fiqh, your love for Islam could actually take you out of Islam without you realizing. It's important to have the ilm and important to have the emotions that you would love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you would love Islam. But the second hey, were al-Khawarij made by the West? Khawarij are pretty much the same idea of ISIS. Were they made by the West? No, they weren't made by the West. Khawarij weren't made by the West, and neither was ISIS. It's basically coming in. Sometimes the society.
You just wonder how they had those videos.
Yeah, it's basically, Noura, if you were to look in each and every single religion, you will have certain people. It's part of human nature. Some people, they are born with wanting things to be basically either black and white. They're very, what is the word, punctual in certain ways, sometimes in matters that are not necessarily in this in this detail. Certain things, they're not necessarily in such intricate detail that you may have to say, well, yes, I've got the deepest detail of how and what makes right and wrong, and therefore I'm going to use the text and explain it to the core, and therefore anybody that would interpret this differently is basically going to be considered going against the text. You would have such people, because it's basically certain human nature. You would have some people that are, very narrow in their vision. You would have certain people, they're very narrow to the point that they would not accept that the words themselves can actually take different interpretations. That, and this usually comes with immaturity, when sometimes you would have a strong emotion about something, but then not realize that you can't necessarily consider yourself as a human being, that you are the place and the foundation of defining truth, that no matter who you are, your interpretation can carry a lot of mistakes. Your understanding of the situation can carry a lot of misinterpretation. You're human. But it isn't until we would glorify ourselves and glorify our interpretation that basically comes and brings with it a narcissist type of an interpretation, where the person is basically regarding, if you interpret things differently, then you're not just attacking me, you're attacking the text, and therefore I would have the right to eliminate you completely by basically killing you. Because they would regard that, hey, this is the punctual way of understanding the text, and therefore you would say, for example, Il-Khawarij, they wanted to be punctual. They wanted to be literally taking certain words in a literal form, and any other interpretation was going to be considered that you're going outside of the text. And the Prophet ﷺ described them. He said, well, they would read the Quran, but it would not go farther than their own throat. They would read it, but it wouldn't even, what does it mean? That's a metaphor in order to tell us that it doesn't really touch their heart, because il-kibr, arrogance, is what determined their interpretation, is what determined the way they would interact with others, is what determined who they are, what they are, and how they would deal with others. And that's why when you're looking at that piece, فَإِنْ خَافَ, if the person feared, and certainly if they feared even the protection, the security of the Muslims, then in that situation, it's important to take in consideration the different situations and the different, let's say, outcomes in ordering for what is good and forbidding what is bad, on how we can preserve the Muslim community and make sure that we're basically defending Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, defending Islam, defending the Muslims as well, and putting that within consideration. If the person feared of course, the lives and the situation for the ummah, then in that situation, they would have no choice but al-inkar bil-qalb. Al-inkar bil-qalb basically literally means, al-inkar means to hate something, or al-inkar means to deny something. Al-inkar means to basically ostracize yourself from something. So when you say biqalbihi, within your heart, that would basically mean in practice that you would keep away from all these different things that your heart recognizes that this is wrong. In other words, you don't expose yourself from it. If you hate someone, you basically wouldn't want to see them. You wouldn't want to be around them. You would somehow isolate yourself from them because you just don't want to be around this person. And if we're talking about hating a certain munkar, that would simply mean that the person is basically separating themselves and keeping a distance from this wronghood because they recognize that this will start rubbing onto their heart without them realizing, and perhaps their heart might get normalized with such behavior. ويهجر ذا المنكر ولا يخالط, and they would basically ostracize themselves and separate themselves from ذا المنكر. What is that? That is basically to mean الملكية. That in لغة عربية, it's basically to mean the owner of something. But this isn't to mean owner in property, but this is to talk about the person that contains the behavior, that has the behavior that is considered munkar, that is considered not accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in other words, the word il-hajr. But wait a minute, I thought Islam was telling us that you should not do hajr, you should not isolate yourself, you should not ostracize yourself from a Muslim brother or sister for longer than 3 days. How do we understand this? Well, when the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned that a Muslim should not isolate a Muslim for longer than 3 days, it's important to consider two things. Number one, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned this hadith, but then the Prophet ﷺ had ostracized 3 men during the time of the Battle of Tabuk. What was the story? The story was that the Byzantine Empire in the 8th year Hijrah, was, 9th year Hijrah, yeah, that would more be probably accurate. And what they did was 40,000 troops from the Byzantine Empire was basically gathering in order to completely bring a final elimination to the Muslim presence in the Arabian Peninsula. So it needed, and that required that the Muslims, whether young, old, everybody except the women and children, were supposed to be, I guess, gathering together to create the largest number possible in order to face what was considered as a supreme power at the time, which was the Byzantine Empire. So the Muslims gathered in a number of 30,000 people. Now, those 30,000 people, of course, they were joining along, but some had come to the Prophet ﷺ, giving him excuses why they cannot come. The first was coming, well, I'm basically, I'm afraid that the blonde women will be a fitna for me, so I don't want to go to protect my faith. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أَلَا فِي الْفِتْنَةِ سَقَطُوا. That's an excuse, but the truth of the matter, you had actually fallen in fitna. The second one, well, I'm really sick these days. I can't accompany you. And we're talking about July and August, so it was pretty scorching heat. And the third one, each one was many, at least from the munafiqeen, were coming to give different excuses. And these excuses to not join along, the Prophet ﷺ would just listen, right? Would just listen and would sometimes give excuses. And sometimes it's like, we're just right there. They're just basically revealing their true selves of what they really are, believers or munafiqeen. 3 Sahaba, they procrastinated to join, and they didn't join until later. And they wanted to join, but it was already too late. They tried, but the Muslims had already gone too far. When the Prophet ﷺ comes back, those Sahaba, they go to the Prophet ﷺ basically not justifying themselves, but they said, we procrastinated, this is what we did, this is what happened, and we're repenting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What did the Prophet ﷺ do? He was silent and ordered that everyone would boycott them. Boycott them? Yes, boycott them. Well, it went even farther that he even ordered their wives to boycott them. Just imagine, no one in the community is talking to you. Even your wife is not talking to you by the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And ضاقت عليهم الأرض بما رحبت ضاقت عليهم أنفسهم. It was basically becoming just beyond of what they can handle. They would go up on the roofs of the masjid, the roofs of their homes, making dua, Ya Allah, we're repenting, because they recognize. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala later basically pardons them and accepts their repentance because they were honest. And this is key, because they were honest. So that's why we would say as-sidqu manja. Honesty is security. Honesty is salvation in itself. Because many times we would lie because we would think of it as, well, at least I'll be protected from the consequence of probably a punishment. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the Prophet said, as-sidqu manja. Honesty is actually your place of salvation. It's not by you lying. You could probably get away from perhaps the punishment at the time. But what you don't recognize is that you had paved the way for more and more lies, and you're going to pile up more, ditches in your life, and then eventually the ditch is going to grow bigger and bigger in its size, because you're going to start finding that through lying, that's the only way to be safe from the consequences of what I'm doing. So what you would do is basically create more and more lies. What eventually that will cause, it will basically cause that person created bigger ditches, bigger holes, and perhaps when they fall, it would be a magnificent fall that would expose the history of their lies, and certainly it would nothing be but a big fadiha, an exposure to who they really are and what they were really always hiding, and that would definitely be something that they would be ashamed of. And it all started out when they were consistent and started out with perhaps the lie that they had done one time. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, looking at this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ ordered that they would be boycotted for 50 days. Well, it wasn't necessarily giving it a limit of 50 days, but this boycott continued until it basically had become 50 days. Is it until the Prophet ﷺ eventually, the ayat were revealed onto him that they were basically excluded from the adhab that they were living in, the punishment, because of their honesty, and that they were pardoned. Basically, their repentance was accepted. And keeping that one in mind, yahjur il-hujran, you could say that if we're boycotting someone because we would know that by boycotting them, that there is a possibility that they would recognize that I'm letting you basically alone. I'm not engaging with you anymore because of the haram that you're doing, because of the choices that you had decided. In that situation, we would look into that boycotting them would be obligatory in certain circumstances, where I would basically think and anticipate that that's going to have an effect on them and make them recognize that this is wrong. Make them recognize that you're putting yourself in the wrong direction, on the wrong path, etc. But it would be wrong to boycott that person if you knew, and if you had known, that if I am going to boycott them, that was going to leave them to the wrong atmosphere, to the wrong peers, to have their power over them. And therefore, if I were to completely boycott them, that means they would not find any arm to reach out to and perhaps come back to. So in other words, you would look at the circumstance, and perhaps even with parenting, that sometimes we would basically have dad using a certain policy, and mom comes in, where mom and dad would agree together that she's probably coming in to tell the child, hey, you need to apologize. That was wrong. So we would work together in order to bring about the right discipline. And that's the same thing even when it comes to perhaps certain group of friends of Salihin, that one friend is giving the nasiha and the other friends, they're basically boycotting him. And we would basically work together in a team. How can we get our friend back to the path of truth, back to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And وَلَا يُخَالِطُهُ, but eventually, if, of course, you had known that this person, there's no way that they're going to get corrected, we don't have the power to somehow get them on the right path, then in that situation, well, spare yourself. Spare yourself. They had chosen that path. Spare yourself. Make sure that you don't get influenced. You don't get influenced by their lifestyle, because if you don't have the power to get them off the track of hellfire, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked you and told you that لست عليهم بمسيطر. You don't have the power to control them. Well, that was what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How is it with you? Sometimes they might take those decisions and make those decisions that they don't want to be on the path of truth. They don't want to be on the path of haqq. And you would see them, يُسَارِعُونَ فِي الْكُفْرِ. You would see them rushing and just running towards al-kufr. They'll be looking for kufr. They'll be looking for drugs. They'll be looking for different ways of how they could probably steal a phone, how they could probably steal money, how they could probably steal or probably sneak something that is not for their sake and not in their favor, but they're basically right there planting the seeds of their own fitna. And this is important. Let's look at this one. He said, قال حذاق أهل العلم. What is الحذاق? What is الحاذق? الحاذق is basically the person that has deep scrutiny and deep and strong qualifications. He said, the scholars that are deeply qualified, this is what they said. ليس من شرط الناهي أن يكون سليما عن معصية، بل ينهى العصاة بعضهم بعضا. He said, it is not a condition that a person that is forbidding others to basically commit falsehood or commit the wronghood, it doesn't have to be that you yourself are doing what is right. So in other words, you've got your shortcomings, If you're ordering for what is right, it doesn't mean that you don't have your shortcomings. Even if you yourself are a sinner, it doesn't mean that you don't have the right to order for what is wrong and what is right. But no, even if you yourself are not applying what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, and even if you yourself are a sinner, it doesn't mean that you would say, well, I'm doing this. I'm actually at fault myself. It doesn't mean that you would say, I don't have the right to speak up because I'm doing it myself. So he said, بَلْ يَنْهَى الْعُصَاةُ بَعْضُهُمْ بَعْضًا. In fact, even sinners should forbid one another from the wrong behavior. The sinners, but they're all sinners. Yes, that's a way to perhaps let them later on create a momentum of good. It's enough that you're doing this sin. Don't add on to the sin of being silent. But even if you've got your shortcomings, even if you're doing the sin, start with forbidding that person from doing the sin. But they already know I'm doing it. Yes, they already know you're doing it. But you just continue doing what is good. Perhaps that would be the voice that you yourself would hear one day. Perhaps that would be the voice that you would hear one day. Sometimes it's important to continue saying what is haqq, because it will later become the word that will later probably vibrate into your heart, and you would probably hear yourself one day ordering for what is good and forbidding what is bad. And perhaps that maw'idha would even start affecting you, and that maw'idha, that good word, will probably later make you a better person. Don't stop. Don't feel that I've got my shortcomings. That's it. I'm a horrible person anyways. No, continue. Continue ordering for what is good, even if you feel horrible, even if you feel that you've got your shortcomings. Don't stop. And he said, قال بعض الأصوليين. He said, some of the scholars of usul. What is al-usuliyin? Al-usuliyin are basically the scholars of usul al-fiqh, the scholars of the principles of fiqh. He said, they had said, فرض على الذين يتعاطون الكؤوس أن ينهى بعضهم بعضا. واستدل بهذه الآية. قال لأن قوله كانوا لا يتناهون عن منكر فعلوه يقتضي اشتراكهم في الفعل وذمهم على ترك التناهي. So this scholar, you wanted to quote him, he said, it is obligatory on those that are basically sharing drinks. What are they doing? They're together, they're sharing drinks, and what are they drinking? Well, they're not drinking apple juice for sure, but they're actually together having an alcoholic drink, a spiritual drink, the name that they would want to give it, a new narrative and a new description. All right. He said it is obligatory that they would forbid one another, and he used this as an evidence, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they were not forbidding one another from doing what is al-munkar, and every single time they would do it, they would continue to do al-munkar. And he said, well, by that, what it means and what it entails is that they were all I guess joining, and they were all doing the act of not forbidding one another. In other words, the biggest sin that they were committing wasn't necessarily the drinking. No, the drinking, that's a sin. But what's even worse than drinking is not ordering each other for what is wrong, or at least forbidding each other from what is wrong. And that was what he was saying. He said, ذَمَّهُمْ عَلَى تَرْكِ التَّنَاهِي. So the whole thing that this ayah was basically scolding them for, it wasn't scolding them for the actual sin, because that's already known. He said the ayah was scolding them for leaving and abandoning the obligation of ordering for what is good and forbidding what is bad. And he said, and this ayah is an evidence to basically tell us that it is impermissible to sit. And the word al-mujalasa. Al-mujalasa actually means that you would engage in such a setting. And this is important to keep in mind. If you know a certain group is a sinner, or a certain group are sinners, then in that situation, you would have to avoid such groups. You would have to leave them. And certainly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically tell us, تَرَى كَثِيرًا مِّنْهُمْ يَتَوَلَّوْنَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. So this ayah was coming in order to tell us, well, what that later appeared like, that they were taking الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا as their place of decision making, as their place of support, as their place of entertainment, as their place of basically family. It was their social gathering. It was their, of course, their financial support. It was what happened. يَتَوَلَّوْنَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. So therefore, just recognizing تَرَى كَثِيرًا مِّنْهُمْ يَتَوَلَّوْنَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَبِئْسَ مَا قَدَّمَتْ لَهُمْ أَنفُسُهُم. What does that mean? That قَدَّمَتْ لَهُمْ أَنفُسُهُم. And who are تَرَى كَثِيرًا مِّنْهُم? You would see many, that is from the Jews. They would basically, just as the leaders, certain Jewish leaders, like Ka'b al-Ashraf and even his friends, and some scholars said, well, this is actually talking about the munafiqeen. Munafiqeen, they were the ones that were taking the Jews and certain Christians, and they were taking the disbelievers as basically the area that they would turn to in order to see them as, hey, their place of power. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, well, the implication, it started out that they took them as their source of inspiration. That's the key word, their source of inspiration. And then this inspired them. So they were taking them as a source of inspiration, as a resource, etc. And that basically resulted in سَوَّلَتْ وَزَيَّنَتْ لَهُمْ أَنفُسُهُم. That later resulted in those people being an inspiration to later on, their words, their lifestyle was basically creating a type of an inspiration by making a new narrative. Their own selves were creating somewhat of a narrative that's later on لَبِئْسَ مَا قَدَّمُوا لِأَنفُسِهِمْ and وَمَعَادِهِمْ. And certainly the ayah is saying, well, it's the worst thing that they could give themselves. It's the worst thing that they could do to themselves. What is it? The worst thing that they could do to themselves is really go against their interests. Because remember when we said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's the laws that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put within nature, al-mashi'a al-kawniyya and al-mashi'a al-tashri'iyya. Let's write that one again, right? Let's write that one again, because this is key. This one is key. This is gold. Al-mashi'a al-kawniyya and al-mashi'a al-tashri'iyya. Okay, can you write that down in English, please, so we can understand it? Sure. Here's the natural order. Okay, and then there's the legislating order. And of course, we're talking about right there. There's a natural order that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, but the legislating order is not foreign and is not going towards the natural order, but the legislating order was actually going towards the natural order. And basically Sharia itself, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-adl, because he is the founder, because he is all just. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whenever he would reveal a certain legislature, whenever he would consider a certain principle, it would be in your favor, because the natural order is basically the order that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you in. And the second you would go against your own nature is the second that you're going to find yourself probably getting sick, probably maybe finding distress and anxiety, and the list goes on and on. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let the legislating order with basically give you the will right there. With your will, you're going to succumb your will to the legislating order in order to lead you to the natural order. Because the natural order, they're basically things you can't control. Natural order, you're not going to be able to control how things function in this world. There are certain laws in biology, certain laws in physics, certain laws that you really cannot control. You're not going to be capable of changing this. You're not going to be capable of changing it. So you'll find yourself, you've got no choice but to sleep. You can probably push your sleep maybe a certain hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, but then eventually the natural order is going to tell you that's it. You need to sleep and that's it. We need to regain that energy. We need to rebuild the momentum for you to move on, or else we're going to collapse. We can't do this. Your body has a certain natural order and you would have no choice to stop it. You've got no choice to stop it. You can't. And that's the natural order. There's no free will in the natural order. And in fact, once the natural order overcomes you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala won't hold you accountable. Let's say somebody went through mental illness. They're not held accountable, at least if they lost their cognitive skills and they lost their ability to process ideas, to recognize. We're not talking about all mental illnesses that a person is not held accountable. We're talking about certain mental illnesses that a person went through what is called junoon mutbaqa, complete mental illness. In other words, complete inability to process ideas, to process recognizing the world around them. Once the natural order is basically right there. Once the natural order overcomes you, and once your natural ability is basically, of course, is overcoming you, then in that situation, you'll not be held accountable. But your free will is supposed to be right there by your force, by your will, succumbing to the legislating order. So your area of ibadah, your area of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is really that area of your free will. The second that your free will is taken away from you, whether perhaps due to perhaps coercion, you were forced to do something, it's beyond your will, or perhaps you had forgotten, or perhaps you somehow, I guess you had mistaken things and confused things, then in that situation, you won't be held accountable. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ تَجَاوَزَ لِي عَنْ أُمَّتِي الْخَطَأَ وَالنِّسْيَانَ وَمَا اسْتُكْرِهُ عَلَيْهِ. The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had dismissed upon my nation 3 things. Al-khata, what they had done by mistake. 2, for what they had done basically with not in their complete sense of mind, وَمَا اسْتُكْرِهُ عَلَيْهِ, and what they were coerced to do. So that legislating order, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just to tell you, if you lost your free will to basically apply the commandment of the legislating order, then in that situation, you won't be held accountable. But you need to recognize that the legislating order was basically displayed for you in order to help you get to the natural order. That's why Sharia is all about bringing you to the natural order, to the natural way, to the organic life, to the organic, natural way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this world in. So what happens? And you could see, لَبِئْسَ مَا قَدَّمُوا لِأَنفُسِهِمْ وَمَعَادِهِمْ. The worst thing that they had presented for themselves, they weren't doing themselves any benefit or any help, because by going against the legislating order, they're going against the natural order and therefore going against their own interest. So they didn't just go against their own interest, but they even went against their own purpose. They lived in a delusion. They thought that they were doing themselves a favor. They thought that they were increasing the amount of happiness. But what they had done is that it's exactly like a person that's taking drugs. They might actually live in some form of ecstasy. They think that, hey, by maximizing the amount of ecstasy, maximizing the amount of entertainment, these feelings that I'm probably getting, that I'm doing myself a favor. But your body and its natural order were not actually designed to take this amount of ecstasy. If you were to take more than what the natural order, Allah Almighty had basically designed your brain to take in an amount of, whether chemicals or whatever it is, or amount of ecstasy, etc., then if you were to maximize it to another level, then what you're going to see is that your brain was not designed to take that amount. And then you're going against your own health. Then you're going against your own interest. You're going drunk. By going drunk, you're basically harming your brain, harming your kidneys, harming, the list goes on. And what you're doing, you think that you're maximizing the happiness, but in truth and in the reality, you're actually just postponing the clash, postponing the harm, postponing and delaying that sorrow and that sadness that you will be coming across. It's not that you eliminated the sadness. It's not that you eliminated the anxiety. It's just that you procrastinated them. You just delayed them. You just delayed them. You just basically let them go at a later and come to you at a later time. That's it. But if you were to face that, let's say, problem or whatever it is, you were to face it at that moment, then in that situation, you would basically face it when it was in its, let's say, in a smaller momentum. And that's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically telling us that, no, you've got the natural order that you may not have the power to stop, but the legislating order was to help you maintain the order that is for your benefit. أَن سَخِطَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ. What is أَن سَخِطَ? What is a sukht? A sukht is basically when we're speaking about curse. A sukht can also be when a person is continuously complaining about something. And this is the worst thing that you could have in any relationship. If the person is constantly complaining about everything, try to find someone else. Try to find someone else. Try to find another relationship, because if this person is complaining and continuously complaining about the things around them, then this person really becomes a toxic person that is surrounding you. But what about me as a parent? Should I not complain about the different things that surround the children, or is that considered toxic? No. If we're basically looking at the ayat are filled with things that are telling you to do and not do, to do and not do. The hadith are filled with to do and not do. Such a discipline is necessary, and this isn't complaining about things. There's a difference between complaining in order to seek correction and between complaining about things that you don't have the power to correct. You don't have the power to perhaps change, maybe, hey, you got cancer, if to complain constantly about cancer and how your life changed and how miserable you're living and all of that. That's basically complaining and complaining about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's a lot about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. That's the type of complaint that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was, one of the types of complaints that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling you, don't complain about the well, but have sabr. But if we're complaining that, hey, you need to clean your room, you need to comb your hair, you need to clean the dishes, wash the dishes, you need to change your attitude, you need to change all of that. This isn't complaining. This is basically giving directions to change, because as a parent, you have the obligation, you have the responsibility to basically let your child go up from one milestone to another where they could be fully independent. When they are on their own, they are fully independent and they're capable of recognizing their shortcomings to lead themselves to success. That's a difference. Continuing, and سَخِطَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ, they themselves, at many times, I want you to look at that one, because that's a key word, سَخِطَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically, سَخِطَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ. Well, what's the opposite of سَخِطَ? رَضِيَ. The opposite of سَخِطَ is رَضِيَ. رَضِيَ means what? Well, رَضِيَ means to be content, to be happy about something. That's الرضا. And a sukht is basically when you're just feeling in continuous distress about something, continuously complaining about something. So here, when you would say that سَخِطَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ, what that would mean is that the Lord Almighty was not content over them, and therefore they themselves وَفِي الْعَذَابِ هُمْ خَالِدُونَ. And therefore, the result is that they would be living eternally in pain. In pain. Is this talking about akhirah, or is this talking about dunya? That they're living all this torture, all this pain. When is that going to be? Well, that's going to be in this dunya and in the akhirah. In this dunya, because when you look at this dunya, if you were to act in accordance with basically the legislating order, you're going to be serving basically the natural order that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in you. You're going to, just like exactly when we look at, hey, you eat organically, you eat the right foods, you basically do exercise, you basically do all that. Your body is going to go in the natural order. It's going to serve you well. Hey, if that's the pattern in food, your body is going to serve you well. It's not going to clash on you. It's not going to crash on you. And you're basically going to say that that's coming in your service. But if you choose to, I guess, eat the junk food and choose to basically eat not healthy and choose to go against what is good for your diet and etc., you're basically going to see inflammations, you're going to see obesity, you're going to see let's say diabetes, your heart problems, kidney problems, blah blah blah, all these different things that will basically start piling up. What happened? Well, you went against the legislating order, which basically let's say here medical prescription basically telling you here, this is what actually makes healthy lifestyle. This is what is good for you. You went against that. Well, you're going to see the natural order basically collapsing on you. You can't bend the reality and expect the world to change for your, basically for your desire. You have to live and see that, well, if you choose to basically go against what is in your favor, you're going to see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his natural order is going to come back to you. وَمَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَ بِهِ. Simple as that. If you go against the legislating order, well, then what's going to happen is that أَن سَخِطَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ. The natural order, the order that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within nature, the order, the force, the power, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that controls things in nature. That's going to come back at you. Don't expect that you can get away with it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَن سَخِطَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ, that the Lord Almighty, his force, his power, acting in, of course, the natural power, in the natural order, is basically going to start working its force against you. سخط الله عليهم. It's going to work its force against you because you or that person had basically had chosen to go against the legislating order. So in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَنْ سَخِطَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ, that the Lord Almighty was not content over them. So what happens is that وَفِي الْعَذَابِ هُمْ خَالِدُونَ. So the consequence was they were basically facing the natural consequence, which is that they're going to be living in nothing but adhab, nothing but the consequence of pain, the consequence of anxiety, mental health, and the list goes on and on. Or perhaps, of course, society and how the society is basically relating to that. ولو كانوا يؤمنون بالله والنبي وما أنزل إليه ما اتخذوهم أولياء ولكن كثيرا منهم فاسقون. If they had believed in Allah and a prophet, which basically is the foundation to helping you know the legislating order in what was revealed onto the prophet, they would have not actually taken them as their area of one their area of resource of legislation, their area of support, their area of entertainment. They would have not taken them as awliya. Why did they go that route then? He said, وَلَكِنَّ كَثِيرًا مِّنْهُمْ فَاسِقُونَ. But most of them, and why did it say most of them? Most of them, in other words, this is to let us know that when we look at the different patterns and anticipating what that would lead to. If a person is living a lifestyle of fisq, a lifestyle where they're going away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then during that day, they're probably death, or when they're older, they're not going to be changing their lifestyle because that wired in their brain. And this is extremely important. The lifestyle that you would live, it basically, let's call it the legislating order. If you chose a legislating order, that's basically, hey, relativism, existentialism, postmodernism, atheism to be the legislating order, then what that is going to do is that it's going to rewire your natural order and rewire how your brain basically sees that order. And you're going to find yourself going against the natural order, and you're going to see yourself that, hey, you had accustomed to it. You had been accustomed to it. You basically went that path. If that person went through that path and basically rewired the way that they would see things, then eventually that's basically going to affect their lifestyle. It's going to affect the way that in the long run, because of that fisq, it's basically going to rewire, reprogram their brain, reprogram the way they would see the legislating order. In the beginning, they were definitely Muslim. They were recognizing that this is wrong. But because they were normalizing it, they were sitting with these people, they were taking them as basically their place of support, and the list goes on and on. What that resulted in is that they completely changed into new human beings without them realizing. Their vision completely changed. Their practices completely changed. Their identity became a new identity. Now their natural person basically had become someone else. Their legislature, their vision became someone else. Now they're a new identity. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called them fasiqun. The majority of them were fasiqun. So how about this? Is it possible that we could see that someone that's not necessarily fasiq, basically go against that? Yes, it is possible. Why? Remember the Prophet ﷺ, in the hadith, he said, إِنَّ أَحَدَكُمْ لَيَعْمَلُ بِعَمَلِ أَهْلِ الْجَنَّةِ. This is perhaps the scariest hadith of all times. إن أحدكم ليعمل بعمل أهل الجنة حتى ما يكون بينه وبينها إلا ذراع فيسبق عليه الكتاب فيعمل بعمل أهل النار فيدخلها. You would do the actions as to what appears to people. Were these people living fisq? No, they weren't. What type of a lifestyle were they living? Oh, they were. You better believe they were living a lifestyle of the people of Ahl al-Jannah. They were not living fasiqeen. So what happened? Well, they were so close to Jannah, it was like an arm reach. They were praying, they were coming to the masjid, they were wearing the hijab, niqab. You see it right there. You could really just say that this is a person that basically is right there, just a believer. Well, what happened? How did the change happen? Said, فيما يبدو للناس, to what appears to people that, yeah, certainly they weren't fasiq, but to what appears to people is that these people are on the right track. What does it mean to what appears to the people? What appears to the people, that would actually mean that this person was concealing something else in their heart. This person was concealing disbelief. This person, whenever they would do what is right, they were seeking praise. They weren't necessarily seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You would even hear when they would speak, it's that they were just condescending to others and just speaking in such a way that is so arrogant. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. At the same time, he talked about the other side, and he said, وَإِنَّ أَحَدَكُمْ لَيَعْمَلُ بِعَمَلِ أَهْلِ النَّارِ. And one might actually do the actions of the people of Ahl al-Nar, the people of hellfire. What are they doing? They're probably drinking. What are they living? Are they living as fasiqeen? Yes, they're living as fasiqeen. They're living as fasiqeen. The hadith was saying, لا يعمل بعمل أهل النار, the actions of Ahl al-Nar, to the point that there would be no distance between them and hellfire but an arm reach. And what happened? فيسبق عليه الكتاب. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already known what their hearts were concealing. فيعمل بعمل أهل الجنة. Right before they would die, they would do the actions of أهل الجنة. They would change completely. And then what? فيدخلها. So should we disregard all that thing that you were talking about, legislating order and natural order and all of that? And because at the end we never know that fisq and hey, look at this hadith you just said that a person could be living fasiq, and therefore they could still go to Jannah. You just said it. Now you're contradicting yourself. No, it's not that we're contradicting ourselves. It's basically letting us know that the probability, even math in Sharia, in Quran, is basically letting us know the probability of living a fasiq and staying as a fasiq was basically going to be the natural order. Only in exceptional cases that you would see things going differently. And this is important. The consistency and the way that you would live your life, that consistency leads you to a certain life. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was giving us those directions on how to stay consistent, how to be careful from those areas that might snatch you out of that legislating order and then find yourself at a different place that you did not expect to be in. In other words, looking for those areas of fitna is crucial to keep you consistent. Because it could be just all of a sudden, perhaps you getting to know a friend. The friend just gave you a phone secretly.
gave you, I guess, some recommendations to go online or whatever it is, or probably had shown you a picture of a guy, or basically connected you, hey, you can talk to this guy. And then, of course, this relationship goes from an innocent conversation, quote unquote, and then later on it becomes a crush, and later on it becomes, hey, to run away with him, and the list goes on and on. And then what happened? How did we get that far? How did such a slip happen? We see it all the time. The slip happened when usually when you got acquainted with the wrong people. That's what that ayah is emphasizing. That when you got acquainted with the wrong people, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, if the person يؤمنون ولو كانوا يؤمنون بالله والنبي وما أنزل إليه ما اتخذوهم أولياء. If they were really, the word يؤمنون is basically giving you that it's a present tense. يؤمنون, a present tense. Well, what does that mean? If the person is consistent with their faith in Allah Almighty and the Prophet, peace be upon him, and what was revealed onto him, whether we're speaking about the Quran, the Quranic revelation, or whether we're speaking about the Sunnah revelation, then they would have been capable of recognizing that they should not have taken them as areas of celebrity, areas of fans, areas that they would engage in and engage with, and basically areas of entertainment, or areas to basically redirect them. And you would say, لَتَجِدَنَّ أَشَدَّ النَّاسِ عَدَاوَةً لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا الْيَهُودَ وَالَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا وَلَا تَجِدَنَّ أَقْرَبَهُم مَوَدَّةً الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّا نَصَارَى ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ مِنْهُمْ قِسِّيسِينَ وَرُهْبَانًا وَأَنَّهُمْ لَا يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ. We're going to stop right there because there's so much to say, and I don't want to get carried away and, and get you, I guess, too tired of every single tafsir class getting you out and I guess into 2 hours and 2.5 hours. So we'll take it, inshallah, excerpts and bits, and hopefully we can, inshallah, keep that, I guess, that momentum of inspiration from the tafsir and taking it, inshallah, bit and bit for us to ponder in, to think closely and think deeply, and even take the time to reread those words and think of them in a word, not only to read, but a word of relationship. سبحانك اللهم بحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. Any questions before we would end?
Bismillah.
Go ahead, dear.
Jazakallah khairan first.
وإياكم.
Although we spend 2 hours, 2.5 hours, but we, mashallah, we get more benefits and we don't feel the time. And the information full of treasure and gems. And my question is for the المشيئة الكونية والمشيئة التشريعية. Yeah, can we consider that delaying the sunset at the Battle of Al-Khandaq, that Allah delayed so can the Muslims, because they are busy with the fighting, and can we say that
Right. So
to achieve
scholars actually, in that particular event, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically delayed sunset in order to basically have the Muslims be victorious. Scholars actually debated whether that literally was happening, let's say whether it literally happened like that, or whether it was more of I guess the Muslims getting busy that they didn't even feel time. All right, when you're so indulged in something that you don't even recognize time. Was that really meaning that, or was that literally saying that there was a time where there was a miraculous thing that happened and basically elongated time, and therefore people basically had seen that no, the sunset was supposed to happen at, let's say, 6:45. This time it happened at 9:45 that day. Is that necessarily the case that way? Majority of the scholars regard that it's that they didn't recognize time. So it wasn't necessarily that the timing, we got a calculation and it basically was literally elongated. I mean, certainly, we can still have miracles when we're speaking about miracles. Miracles are basically bending the natural order for the cause of the prophet, for the cause of basically for the cause of perhaps a prophet or even a salih person, for a particular reason. Okay, so whether that reason, and you want to look at bending the natural orders, changing the natural orders. It can actually be in different ways of miracles. Let's give an example. It can be for a prophet, and we would call it mu'jiza. And that mu'jiza would be, he's challenging people. Well, if I'm capable of bending and changing the natural orders, that means I'm supported by the one that has the power to control the natural order. So Prophet Isa alayhi salam was bringing people's sight back with, of course, no medical treatment, but it was a miraculous way. Or perhaps changing this pigeon into a live bird right there. Or perhaps Prophet Musa alayhi salam transforming this cane to having the power to basically splitting the sea, or perhaps gulping up all the magic that they were doing, etc. So that's basically right there to challenge. The salih person can have something that can change the natural order, and that would be called a karama.
Yeah.
A karama where a person might be, I guess, saying, hey, I was capable of, I guess, feeling a sense or something, perhaps that is, let's call it not normal, that's not natural. Or perhaps you, hey, you made the dua that you would be cured from cancer, and the doctors were telling you that's it, you're in a final stage, you're going to be dying, you were basically living your last 2 weeks of life, and then all of a sudden this person gets a karama, gets a miracle, this person is cured, and they'll do all the testing and they'll say, we don't know what happened, but this person is basically completely cured. All right, just a karama happening. All right. When we look at karama right there, in other words, there isn't necessarily, let's call it a scientific explanation that can explain what happened. So in that situation, we would look that it's basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power working within the natural order to change basically in favor for that person. Then there's the other something called al-istidraj. What is al-istidraj? An evil person can have certain miracles happening. An evil person can have a certain miracle happening to them. Let's give an example. Musaylim al-Kadhab, he wanted to make it seem that he was getting miracles. And what he did, he wanted to show that, hey, I can make miracles too. So he spit in the eyes of one man that was complaining of, I guess, eye pain. And then this person basically goes blind. This person goes blind. And of course, what he wanted to mimic was that the Prophet ﷺ, when Ali ibn Abi Talib, during the Battle of Khaybar, he basically had a ramad, or had basically eye discharge, and that was affecting his ability to see, ability to basically be able to run and lead a war. All right. And that's when the Prophet ﷺ basically blows or spits in his eyes, and Ali ibn Abi Talib gets cured instantly. Musaylima al-Kadhab wanted to do the same thing, but it actually happened in the other way around. He spit in his eyes and the man basically became blind. Same thing when you're looking at Dajjal. Dajjal will also have certain miracles that he would be capable of running, where those that would believe in him, they would become prosperous. He's capable of controlling certain natural order. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him the power to control, I guess, different powers of treasures. And he would say, be, and it is. And it becomes right there, right before people's eyes, the treasures, the produce, the earth turning green right before their eyes in a miraculous way. And certainly, it basically is the greatest. The Antichrist or Dajjal is basically the greatest fitna ever to live. Because you're seeing right there, how am I going to be capable of knowing whether this person is given the power by God or whether this person is basically an imposter if he's already doing miracles right before my eyes? And that's why the Prophet ﷺ was giving us key. Your Lord is not one-eyed. In other words, if he really was God, he would have been capable of right there giving himself a body of basically no deformity. But he wasn't capable of giving himself even the cure to his eye problem or his bow legs or even his deformity on his body, a number of different deformities that he basically has. But of course, he still manages to delude and deceive the masses, in particular women. And this is important. This is important. This is concerning me as a woman. How is it that we are the most to basically confuse those areas, live in this delusion? Just think of it as an inspiration without us realizing. So it's important. The Prophet ﷺ was saying, for the Dajjal, you won't be able to not get deluded if you were to see him. So what should I do? He said, don't even go and see him. If you would know that he's living in a certain place, he's traveling to a certain place, just run away from that place. You would not be capable of handling and maintaining your deen if you were to see him. It's going to be too much of a delusion, too much and far beyond of what you might be capable of perhaps standing with your faith in front of this person in what miracles he could be doing right before your eyes. He said, run and run far and do not whatsoever attempt and let your curiosity go and check him out. Because the delusion is going to be beyond what your faith might actually stand in during that moment and say, well, you're strong enough to face all of this. So inshallah, I hope I answered the question. Did I answer the question, dear?
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Just I want to reach that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changed many things in the nature for the sake of his believer and their righteous slaves. And sometimes it comes like he give this karama, maybe it's karama, you can tell me if it's right or wrong, that sometimes person heard about a person he didn't see him before, but in the ru'ya, I guess not dream, he saw this person with the same clothes he wear, and when he meet him and we see him the first time, the same person. Subhanallah. Does it karama or does it what?
So in karamat are of course are different. So I can't necessarily say whether that is a particular karama. I guess I don't really know the situation and exactly what you're talking about. But in the end, karamat can happen to support the salihin. So if a person is a salih person, they can get a karama. And a karama can happen to someone that is not even a salih person, to just help them find guidance. So somebody that is probably confused on their deen, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to guide them, might give them a karama just to help them find the path. But that doesn't mean that, I lived that myself, and I was really wanting a karama. And I think I mentioned the story. I really wanted a karama, and I would say, Ya Allah, give me a karama. And I just want, any miracle to happen for me to know that Islam is the truth. And I went to my professor and I said, I really searched and I really hoped for a karama and nothing happened. So my professor tells me, well, did you not see the moon? Did you not see the stars? Did you not see the sun? And I just said, well, that's not a miracle. That's normal. And he said, no, it's not normal. I said, how come Bani Israel were getting a karama? Why shouldn't I get something similar? And he said, and he responded to me, he said, well, Bani Israel got that karama because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِنَّهَا لَا تَعْمَى الْأَبْصَارُ وَلَكِنْ تَعْمَى الْقُلُوبُ الَّتِي فِي الصُّدُورِ. It's not that the eyes were not capable of seeing the miracles that surrounded them. It's that their hearts were so blinded from seeing the truth. And that's the thing, is that you can have somebody not even have strong faith, get a karama, get a miracle, because their hearts are so blinded from seeing the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the world around them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them certain karamat. Maybe, hey, they were about to make an accident. That accident was really going to be extremely fatal, but right before their eyes, who knows what happened, with a split of a second, this person, the car just maneuvers somewhere else and the car just stops. That's a karama right there. It was a miracle, literally a miracle. You know that you probably didn't stop the car, and that there was no way that you would have been capable of doing that, but it was a split of a second that everything really changed in your favor, and it wasn't something that you had probably put any effort to make it happen. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give al-karama as well to people that are perhaps not necessarily pious, just to give them a second chance and a third chance to basically find guidance.
It's not like what I mean as a karama, like it's like a gift. My language can't help me. Let's say that something hit your brain about someone will call you and you know him, and then few minutes he call you. Is this
So this happens to
حتى
Muslims.
سادسات.
Okay, is this a sixth sense?
Uh.
So one thing to say is that that the Prophet ﷺ actually said, "Al-arwah junudun mujannada." Al-arwah junudun mujannada. There are souls in our spirits. That there's something else that basically is driving. It's a driving force that basically drives certain things in our hearts without us realizing, certain things within our spirits. What is actually controlling that is basically telling us that it's even beyond your body. And when you're looking at that, you're continuing the hadith, and it says, ما تعارف عليها ائتلف وما تناكر منها اختلف. And what is ما تعارف عليها ائتلف? Ta'araf, in other words, before the life that we are created in now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala joined us before this life. And it seems that we were somehow in different organisms, in different groups, and in different classifications. Who knows exactly what it was? But he said, ما تعارف عليها ائتلف, that there are certain souls, certain spirits, they basically get acquainted with each other. You could be walking down the street, and so for some reason, you just like that person. And you're like, I don't know why, but I don't know, I just like that person. And you wonder why. I don't even know who that person is, but I just like that person. It could be that in alam al-ghayb, you were perhaps coming from the same source as that person without you realizing. Who knows? This is one scholar's interpretation, but all of this is really ghaib. When you, at the same time, you can find someone, there's really nothing wrong with them. Tanakara, they're just coming from a different source, coming from a different, you just don't blend with that person. And it's not like they had done anything wrong. You, on the inside, you just feel that you don't blend with that person. Well, this isn't to necessarily use, well, let me ask my intuition, let me ask my gut, how does it feel about X or Y and Z, in order for me to know and basically make a final statement. You know what? We come from a different source, and because I feel it on the inside. No, you don't want to do that because you don't really know the truth of the matter on whether it's a delusion that you're living or whether it's an actual thing that happened before your creation. You don't really know. So you just need to work the data out and see whether this person is good, how they're living their life, etc. That's how you would want to work your data out in order to determine how we would basically communicate with one another. So that is the communication. Is it possible that we can have a sixth sense? That's the question. Is it possible that we can have a sixth sense? So that area, we just know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet basically giving us hints that there is a type of communication that is more than the materialistic communication, how you communicate with one another. And there is another type of communication, which is basically in alam al-ghaib. It's in al-arwah. It's in the spirits. That's it. That's all we could know. It's like, there's another communication. Why would the mom, for example, all of a sudden feel that, uh-oh, my son's doing something bad. And you're like, wait a minute, how did you know that your son is doing something bad? It's like, oh, I can feel it on the inside. Is it an intuition? Is it a sixth sense? Is it somehow that she basically got a different type of communication where she could recognize the baby? Oh, the baby is hungry. And even though the baby's not actually around. But is that a sixth sense? Well, what we're being told is that there's another form of
It's the same,
communication
yes,
between beings that
Sariyatul
is
Jabal
far
Jabal.
beyond the oral. Yeah, well, that one was a miracle. Okay, yes, Sariyat al-Jabal, that wasn't an intuition. That was a miracle. That was different. Because he literally saw al-Jabal. He literally saw the mountain, and then he would tell Sariya, he tells him, hey, just look at the mountain, look towards the mountain in order to basically, I guess, change the outcomes of the war. So that was a miracle. That was different. But we're talking about situations where we're sitting down and all of a sudden I'm basically feeling that my baby is in danger. You would get up and sure thing. He was right there at the top of the stairs, ready to make a real good downfall right there. What did you get? Was that any form of intuition, any form of a sixth sense? Well, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was, or the Prophet was letting us know, that there are certain things that go beyond our communication with materialistic things and a certain communication that basically is a ruh. You would, or perhaps even electric things. I don't know. We would say a group of women, they're living together, all the women would get their periods at the same time. Well, what happened? Is there any type of an impulse or that happens in the brains or whatever it is that basically is affecting us? And women would they're living together. They would get pregnant at the same time. Did they have their fertility even change? Did their body even change? We just need to know that there's a communication that our brains would basically communicate with other people. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ was even telling us, hey, when you eat with a person that is a believer, because without you realizing who you communicate with, who you eat with, who you surround yourself with, the place that you would be living in and who you surround yourself with, at the end, it will go farther than just a communication. It will even affect your deen.
Jalis to Janis.
Of course, it's basically, if we're capable of, I guess, seeing and sensing that we are having certain senses, certain communication that our body, our brain, etc., communicates with the things around us. Okay, well, can it go up to the level of perhaps communicating even our spirituality? If I'm living and surrounding myself with a salih person, even though I'm probably not a salih person, but I'm living around a salih person, could their inspiration, their light of salah, just by me being around them, actually inspire me? Well, according to the ayat, the answer is yes.
Mhm.
Yes, even if you're not a salih person, just be around the salihin. The Shafi'i used to say, I'm not a salih person, but I would know that just being around the salihin, that in itself is success.
Mhm.
In other words, go to the masjid, even though you just feel that you don't belong there, because you're not as good as these people. Just go. Just go. Because remember, the Prophet ﷺ actually said people would be sitting in the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically في بيت من بيوت الله, and what are they doing? يتدارسون القرآن, يتدارسون كتاب الله. They're studying the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, studying Islam, etc. حفتهم الملائكة. The malaika would basically right there surround them with their blessings. What does the blessing look like? What is this a rhetorical term? No, it's not. It's an actual thing that you may not see. It's an actual thing that changes your life, that changes your psychology, that changes who you are, that changes your identity. So sitting with the salihin, yes, definitely, it has a certain communication that will, just like we would say that it's part of our subconscious mind. You would see somebody that is constantly talking about dieting, you start getting, I guess, the inspiration to diet. You're seeing somebody that is probably studious, you would start wanting to be studious. And you could see that studies are actually telling us that the people that choose their friends, let's say successful people, you hang out with successful people, you would increase your chance of success by 30%. And similarly, if you were to, even if you're a successful person, even if you're a smart person, if you were to hang out with people that are, I guess, failures, they don't care about their future, they don't care about building a success, they don't care about being consistent and working towards their success, guess what? You drop your chances of success by 30%. Right there, it goes boom, boom, boom. It just goes in those different directions. Even though, so I'm just surrounding myself with that person. Well, this isn't just talking about success in school and success in, I guess, in your business, but this is also talking about success in your deen. Who you hang out with is basically going to affect on what you become.
Man, I need to hang out with the skinny Saleh people.
Love
Sorry.
that, Noura.
Sorry.
Love that, Noura. Love that, Noura.
Hmm.
The skinny Saleh people. Loved it, Noura. Loved it.
Right. So, Assalamu alaikum.
Skinny
go ahead.
Saleh people. That's a good one, Noura. Loved it. Absolutely. Came on time, right?
So,
Loved it. Loved it. Yeah. We got to start putting people onto scale. Let's see. I can see your emails in place. Good. Let's see. Weight, please. A little overweight. Okay, we'll talk to you later. You can go somewhere else. That's a good one, Noura. Go ahead, sister. I can see your hujurat. You wanted to say something.
yeah, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Jazakallah khairan for everything you do. There's no way I would get bored. But I do have a question. First of all, you know
Especially
what?
when you have people like Noura and you have people like Umayya, I mean, that's it.
Right. You
She
know,
really did.
We pop up like popcorn.
Exactly. She really took me into a different world. It's like, man, I really need to hang out with skinny Salihin people.
Yeah, yeah, inshallah. Me too, big time. But you know the subject that Hajj Maya was talking about, like um when you really click with someone and everything, that's so interesting to me. But I had a question, like clarification on something. I didn't quite get what you're saying, but it was scary to me. You talking about what was it you were talking about? How we could end up doing things like Ahl nar. May Allah protect us. I mean,
That is definitely very scary. And that's extremely important to keep in mind, that just by seeing someone probably doing the wrong thing, don't look down at them, because you never know. You never know that they could be the ones that actually have a pure heart, and they could be the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would bless with repentance at the end of their time and actually get them to Jannah.
I
Never
see.
look down, even if it's a sinner. Don't look down at them, and remember that they could have a good heart, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would, I guess, give them that guidance at the end of their time. They could be the ones to make it to Jannah and the other person not make it to Jannah.
Right. SubhanAllah, may Allah protect
That
us.
is so scary. And I've seen it multiple times. Seen it multiple times where, subhanallah, I did mention the story of one of my cousins, if you would remember, but it wasn't just one, but it's a number of different times where people, hey, they were living perhaps 90 years old, and then all their life they were non-Muslim, but just the day that I guess somebody comes in, tells them about Islam, they would become Muslim, and a month later is when they would die. Like they only lived 1 month being Muslim, but then 90 years they were not Muslim. And you would see many
SubhanAllah.
others, their life was really a mess, but they have such a pure heart, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically determine that their outcome would be different. Why did
Right.
Allah, is it Allah that determined? It's basically both. The person themselves, remember that natural order and the legislating order, there are certain people that in their intrinsic selves, they're actually living the natural order. They could be doing, I guess, their legislating practices were off ground and off guard, but their natural order on the inside, they basically had this sincerity, they basically had this faith, they basically had their this pure selves of themselves on the inside. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew about that natural order on the inside of them, and later they just needed to fix that legislating order. So later Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided them, or they themselves chose the guidance to basically fix that legislating order and put it on track. And then when the natural order and the legislating order, when they go together, that's what guarantees Jannah.
SubhanAllah. This reminds me, and this hadith has been on my mind quite a bit later. And we talked about this a couple of classes ago about how someone would wake up a believer and die a kafir. I mean, and go to bed as a kafir, and someone, a non-believer, will go to bed and a believer.
Right.
And SubhanAllah, this is so scary to me. I mean, I would
Especially
rather,
during our times.
especially during what times?
Our times,
Yeah,
I'm seeing this like never before. The I would say, there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, "Inna min al-bayani la sihra." What does that mean? That some of the eloquent speech can be magic. It can be, this quote can actually have different angles. It can mean inna min al-bayani la sihra, that some of the eloquent speech can have magic in a positive influence. And at the same time, some eloquent speech can have magic in its evil momentum and affecting people's lives without us realizing where it's manipulating people. And during our times, I guess with AI, with I guess the massive information and misinformation was letting people confuse these two parameters, and it's becoming an area where it is becoming like magic, manipulating people. This min al-bayani la sihra, this, it seems like it's information, but then you are seeing this amount of information. It's so easy. You know, the worst of the lies are the lies that contain truth within them. You're not going to believe in Santa Claus. Yeah, you know it's not true. That's a simple one. But if I were to somehow, you know, bring a doctor perhaps and give you some information and go into some jargon, it's going to be really easy if you're not a specialist to believe that.
Right.
It just takes some jargon, a few pieces of words here and there, and he might have used words probably that makes it seem like, yeah, enzyme, let's see, basically used certain terminologies that you don't know what it means, and you basically believed it. And that's what right now, during our times, you're seeing lobbies use different, they're called studies, but they were actually paid studies, and it's coming forth in journals. It's coming forward as nothing but this is science. This is intellect. This is what it means. And without us realizing, inna min al-bayani la sihra, you could see that there is manipulation that is really played out. It is paid for. It is acted in ways and acting in ways where it's manipulating the masses and presenting it like it is knowledge. And that's so scary.
Yeah.
There's magic played out, and the magic that is played out is making it seem like it is based on research.
You know, this is something, it's, I don't know how quite to express it, you know. It said, you know, I believe it's there the hadith that Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, you know, there will come a time where you have to cling on to the religion, like even with your back, like your molars.
Right.
And, you know, it's, you know, hearing, you know, keeping this hadith that I keep thinking about, and also Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam making that dua so many times about keeping his heart on the straight path. I mean, I am so scared. I mean, I seriously would rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take me right now than to take a chance of you know, losing my faith. I mean,
That's, you know what? That's actually, inshallah, faith in itself. That's basically what the Sahaba themselves were making the dua for. Ya Allah, لا تمتني إلا وأنت راض عني. Ya Allah, only make me die when you are content over me. Allahumma ya muthabbit al-qulub, thabbit qulubana ala dinik. That we would always make that dua. But certain things are key to helping us at least enhance how we can stay steadfast. Sometimes changing the society, sometimes perhaps being consistent in dhikr, being consistent in seeking ilm, maybe even changing your lifestyle and what you're looking at, what you're listening to, all these different things. And don't be lenient on any small amount and say, well, this one, it's not too bad. It's because these not too bad at many times could actually be the area that you would slip on. You know, you would be walking and it could be just a small needle, might actually cause an infection. And basically, you didn't think much of it. So you
Mhm.
just gotta be really careful and really tentative, because shaitan can come in those moments. But we always have to make the dua, because we can never guarantee. We could never guarantee that any heart might flip. And we talked about Abdullah al-Qasimi. We talked about different examples of how, hey, they lived in ilm and then all of a sudden they shifted into something else. We could never guarantee ourselves. Even if you're giving
Right.
durus, even if you're getting a PhD in Islamic studies, you could never guarantee yourself. And ask always Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep your heart steadfast. One key thing
Mhm.
that would always be the major loss is arrogance. What got
Yeah.
Iblis into that type of the main fall is really arrogance. Same thing.
Yeah.
You look at each and every single example. Fir'aun, it's arrogance. You look at those different examples, it was al-kibr. Al-kibr, arrogance, and thinking that you had mastered it all. Remember, if you've got the knowledge, فوق كل ذي علم عليم. Know that there's someone that's going to be having more knowledge than you. If you
Yeah.
think that you've got the faith, know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can shift your faith into something else with an instant without you realizing. If you think you're so happy about yourself that, hey, I've got it all right, I repented, I'm going to go to Jannah, etc., you never know where the fitna can actually come to you in. That word in itself is actually fitna. So just
Mhm.
maintain and recognizing that area. اللهم إني أسألك فعل الخيرات وترك المنكرات وحب المساكين. Ya Allah, I ask you to grant me the ability to do what is good, avoid what is evil, and loving the masakeen. Loving the masakeen is one key therapy to taking away our arrogance. It's a key thing.
Mhm.
Surrounding yourself with the masakeen, surrounding yourself with the poor, surrounding yourself with those people that are, I guess, not privileged. So you would recognize that what really matters is not matter, money, materialism, but values.
Right. Jazakallah khairan. I have a quick favor to ask in this case. Do you mind putting up this dua as well as the other one that the Sahabi made about
Sure.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not taking them until he's satisfied
Yes,
with them?
inshallah. We will make that in a separate video, inshallah.
Okay, inshallah. Inshallah.
Allah
Jazakallah
yahfadk.
khairan.
Wa iyyakum. All right, everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wait. Walaikum salam.
Okay, Noura, she's looking for a skinny, salih person. Go ahead, Noura.
I just wanted to say, can you share with us this what you have on the screen, the exact one that you use?
Oh, you mean the actual PDF?
Yes.
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, sure.
We
Yeah.
won't edit it. You could just add us as viewers or whatever.
Aren't you already seeing? Yeah, you're already seeing it.
No, but
there's
I
no
want
way
to
that
read ahead, like before this.
this is a PDF, Noura, so there's no way that you can edit it anyways, but you can.
I mean, with your highlights, yani.
Oh, with my highlights. So my highlights do continuously change as I would be reading. So I will show you what page are we on. This is 107. So I would be reading and highlighting, and as you know, I would prepare those classes, and at many times, be taking just hours just highlighting, and I would say this was important, that one's not important, etc. So I'd be happy to share this one, but like I said, sometimes I would be, why would I consider this one important? And I might actually just remove the highlight. But I would be happy, every single time, I guess, update you. See, this is how far I'm going with my preparation for tafsir. Okay.
Okay.
I guess I ended up right here. Okay, so I'm basically past that preparation. So yeah, so I'm just right there, 20 pages past what I'm ready for, but then I get carried away with with talking, but I had a lot highlighted and I continue. So even today I'll go back and just when you would say that I basically ended up probably page 120, I might actually continue reading today and further highlight, because I absolutely enjoy, and believe it or not, so many times I would be like, oh man, I wish I could do my tafsir class right now. I'm getting this inspiration. You know, when you're getting, all of a sudden you're getting this feeling, you're afraid to lose that idea. And I
Yeah.
wish I could just go on, turn on the Zoom and just get the recording and just record it before the idea gets lost. And that happens a
Write it
lot.
down.
Well, the thing is that you can write it down, Noura, but sometimes you're washing the dishes, you're cooking, you're cleaning the house, and you can't just keep on stopping. Your brain is constantly working. You can't just stop. And
Yeah.
the idea is just coming to you, and you're like, oh, no, I'm not going to forget that one. And of course, you're a human being, you're going to forget it.
Allah, yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah, this is خاطرة.
خاطرة, exactly.
Yeah.
خاطرة, just the خاطرة. Just
يخطر على البال.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, so take the time. But I'd be happy to give that that copy. What's actually good, right now there is on AI, you can actually upload this PDF, and then it will translate the whole PDF for you. I know you would have to pay like, I think it was like $5 a month or something, but it's really worth it for those that are constantly using these references and resources. So yeah, I think it's like that. And you don't have to be continuous. You could just use it a one-time thing, and then you would upload this PDF, and it would actually, my husband uses that, and
Yeah, but would that help you learn Arabic?
well, I mean, it does. I mean, because we're talking about almost a 75% accuracy, Noura. The other day, I'll show you what I did. The other day I went to ChatGPT and I was testing ChatGPT. Well, yeah, me testing ChatGPT. Okay, this is what I did. I know. Okay. Not everything is accurate on ChatGPT. So I basically went on ChatGPT. I'll show you what I did. And I went to ChatGPT and I said, give me معاني الألف والسين والتاء في اللغة العربية. Okay. And this is what it said. Let's see. Here we go. This is what it did. So it basically said, so the meanings for the alif sin ta that comes prior to the verb, remember, like istat'ama, etc. So it said, okay, well, it would basically mean these things. I was like, okay, well, what if I wanted Noura to read it? That's going to be hard for her. Translate that into English, please. Okay.
Mm.
Okay, here we go. It basically gave it to me in English and said, well, it is used to indicate an action to seek. Here we go. We said that many times. It is indicating also to gain benefit. It is also indicating the continuation of something. That's pretty cool. Yeah, let's see. You know what? معاني الشدة. Okay. التضعيف. It's called التضعيف. التضعيف والشدة. Let's see what it tells me. Oh, come on. That's too hard for me to understand. Give it to me in English, please. Okay. Say it in English, please. There we go. And this is what it's saying. Doubling. In grammar, it would basically mean it's that the root is repeated. It would basically mean an emphasis. And it could also mean, let's say, to indicate a letter that carries basically this diacritical mark, basically that. And yeah, let's say, you know what, you're to give me more information. That's too much. That's too little. Give me more information. Give more information. It's like, oh yeah, sure. I'll give you more information. This is so cool, man. This is unprecedented. Look, it's giving you more information. Give me examples. Give me examples. And I'd like you. Yeah, you're just not doing your job today. Okay, here we go. Look at what it gave you. This is so cool, Noura. You see that?
Yeah.
This is so cool.
والله بدعي لك أنا على
والله إشي مش طبيعي.
But you have to know what to ask first.
جدا very great. والله very good and helpful in all things.
Absolutely. This is going to cause a revolution for human knowledge. The other day I was listening to, what was the guy's name? Let me see if I can get that, get, was a podcast that I was listening to. Let's see, the podcast, and he was talking about AI and the danger of AI, and he was where's that podcast? But anyhow, forgot where oh, this guy. So this guy was actually talking about the danger of AI, and he actually said something that I never thought would actually be true of AI. And he was saying that AI right now is capable of even learning new information. And in other words, there's going to come a time where AI is going to start giving us information that we as human beings were not yet going to understand. It's and he gave, I guess, the example, the parable for it. And he said, well, it's kind of like, Einstein explaining the laws of relativity to somebody that knows nothing about math. And the guy that knows nothing about math is going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about, but nice to hear you talking, but I don't really know what you're talking about. And that's the same thing. Because he was talking about AI, that it's basically going to be capable of learning new information, recognizing that, hey, this is new information, this is something that we can add. This proved that it's basically containing some faults. Now here's new information, and then therefore growing at a fast pace, and therefore it's going to be doubling in its pace, where AI is going, if used by the wrong people, you could probably have children just know how to ask a certain question and create perhaps atomic things, or who knows what they'll be doing, or probably, of course, the wrong people just using AI in different ways that could actually destruct mankind. And that's so scary. That's so scary. I mean, certainly you can use it for a good cause, for a good reason. I was actually thinking about all of this, and I challenged ChatGPT, and I was like, you know what? Give me the tafsir for this ayah or that ayah. And it didn't actually use the different books of tafsir. It gave me the tafsir, but in the aid of using multiple tafsir, it basically simplified and introduced a new way of understanding tafsir. Are we going to perhaps come one day to probably having, a new tafsir? We're not talking about new tafsir where it's a new understanding for the Quran, because, hey, it has to be in the lens and in the light of Quran and Sunnah. But are we going to have, AI probably integrate the intelligence of al-Zamakhshari along with Tahir ibn Ashur, along with probably al-Biqai, along with probably, I don't know, al-Alusi, come together and say, well, I can tell ChatGPT, I want you to integrate these minds and these visions together, and I want you to give me a tafsir in the lens of these tafsir that would give me a new understanding that was basically in the lens of those mufassirin that was not I guess explained before. That would be so magnificent. That would be unprecedented. This really baffles me. Are we, I was even asking ChatGPT. I said, I put in hypothetical fiqh questions, and I would say, hey, I want you to tell me this fatwa in accordance to the Shafi'i madhab, to the Hanafi madhab, to this. And it would basically give me to a certain level of accuracy. It's not always completely accurate, but I'm sure that there's going to come a time where the accuracy is definitely going to be farther than we can imagine. What's going to happen to our shuyukh? What's going to happen to our shuyukh? Well, what does that mean? Well, they definitely need to be updated with these resources, because if they're not updated with the resources, then they're basically going to be behind in tackling the misconceptions out there. There are definitely going to be lots of misconceptions, and there are definitely going to be some areas that are, because you want to keep in mind that what ChatGPT and what AI is using is basically what is out there in basically Google, what is out there in basically shared on the different databases. So far, it doesn't yet use the resources in books. Will it one day go to Google's books and all those libraries and actually derive meanings, derive information from that? Now that's going to be nothing but a revolution. That in that situation, it might actually generate, of course, different misconceptions that we have to even start answering. And then are we going to use ChatGPT in order to respond to a misconception? What's going to happen? Are we then going to start using ChatGPT to basically right there, because we're going to be weak in our ability to write, in our ability to use our mind? Or what's going to happen? This is going to be really scary for our children, really scary for humanity, because if it's used in the wrong way, then we're really going to be facing a society of fitna like never before. And where is it played? It's going to be played in AI. That's so scary. I cannot fathom I cannot stop thinking of the different areas of fitna that there might be happening. And all of it is really virtual. ChatGPT. What?
Who invented?
Who invented?
Yeah.
Okay, you know what? Let's ask ChatGPT. Who invented you? Who invented? Right? You
I
could ask
asked
him.
I asked him about
Yeah, who invented you?
identify
Exactly.
you.
Yeah, there you
He
go.
gave
He'll
me
give
your
you an answer.
ID.
Let's see. It's a research organization, artificial intelligence. They created me to assist with a wide range of questions. Who was the person
ask
to
who's in
make this idea?
who's in what organization?
What organization? Here we go. So John McCarthy, Alan John McCarthy, Marvin Minsky's basically giving me Elon Musk, OpenAI, founded by Elon Musk, Sam Altman, and others in 2015.
Oh,
There you go. Let's see. Is there an agenda that what should we say? Is there an agenda that creates, I guess, I don't know, help me, creates the answers for you? I don't know. Whatever.
did you stop the record?
I don't have a specific agenda, he said. Or whatever it said. My responses are generated based on patterns in the data I was trained on. As a algorithms. Okay, that's it.
Algorithm.
Exactly. To analyze and understand language, allowing me to provide answers. Okay. So you just looking at the algorithm, that's it. It's not coming out. I guess I need to work on my calculus algorithm. That's it. It's not coming out. That's it. Yeah. You know, my aunt, when I was basically 7 years old, my aunt is only 8 months older than me. So she basically went to first grade before me, and she learned the Fatiha. So she would be there to teach me the Fatiha, but I couldn't get Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim right. It would always come out with me as in Musqatim. That's it. It was in Musqatim, Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim. And she basically just, I guess, gave up that there's no hope in you. That's it. There's no hope. And I was like, oh, no, wallah, wallah, I'll get it. Musqatim. And I would think that I got it. So here's algorithms. Did I get it? Okay. Right now it's just not coming out right. So yeah. I guess we'll just end right there. with stay tuned for more on AI and what it can do.
That's a good one.
Exactly.